Hello, good evening. My name is Diana Munn, and I am Director of Public Programs for the Harvard Museums of Science and Culture. I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's event sponsored by the Harvard Museum of Natural History. It is now my pleasure to introduce Don Pfister, Asa Gray Professor of Systematic Botany and Curator of the Farlow Library and Herbarium of Cryptogamic Botany, who will introduce our program.
Thank you, Diana. And thank you all for coming out. Were you here in Cambridge, you would be in a rainstorm. You'd be having lightning and thunder, but we're not doing it that way. And I appreciate you all being here. This is in celebration of the Blaschka glass flowers and of the new book, which I'm showing you here. The book is available through the website of the museum. My recent involvement in the Ware collection of glass flowers came when the gallery was being renovated in 2016. You will hear about the renovation in Jenny Brown's talk later this evening. Of course, like many of you, I'm fascinated by the models and recall the first time I saw them. There was a sense of being overwhelmed, but still, that they were glass. Could it be? Later, I used them in many of the plant courses I taught here at Harvard. What an advantage to be able to send students to see coffee or tea, or one of my favorites, the banana. Each of the models carries a story. For our science students or botanical researchers, the story might be the plant itself, where it grew, what it was used for, and what characters are used to classify the plant. That we could send students to the gallery and know that they can observe the plant as they would study them in nature is a particular attraction of the models. These artists rendered glass as a portrait of the plant, with accuracy and deception. The artistry of the models attracts others. Rudolf characterized their work as scientifical artwork. They studied the plants to be able to render them with an accuracy that confounds and confuses the viewer. I once gave a tour in which I brought plants from my garden that corresponded to plants in glass. The problem was that the glass plants looked better than those that I had carried in from home. Pristine in glass, wilted in my hand. The models are painterly, they trick the eye, they make you believe they are something other than what they are. It was said that the Blaschkas used secret techniques, a statement that Rudolf refuted. What was special was their eye for the subject, their craftsmanship, their willingness to continually look for new methods and materials to better represent the characteristics of the plants. Also, their command of materials and their artistry. You will see in Scott Fulton's presentation some of their experimentations that have proven to be the enemy of the models. If we are to enjoy these models into the future, a conservation program must continue in order to address serious issues regarding their condition. But as you will see also in Natalja Kent's work, the attention to detail, their skill, imagination, and invention is very much on display and can be continued to be enjoyed with proper treatment. Now, let me thank those who have made this project possible. Jane Pickering conceived of the book project. Barbara Bodine carried it through. The editors and designers at Scala Arts Publishers brought the book to glorious fruition. A gift from George and Kathy Putnam supported conservation work. Gallery renovation and photography for the book were made possible by a gift in memory of Melvin R. Seiden. Renovation was also supported by a grant from the Massachusetts Cultural Facility Fund. Thank you. None of this could have happened without your support. I also want to thank our volunteers who tend the gallery. In the end, I will say this. Part of my question and answering. Yes, the only examples are here at Harvard. Yes, they are mostly glass or mostly glass and some other materials, but remember, glass is not always stable. No, they do not have real plants encased within. Yes, each flower, each detail, no matter how small, is an accurate rendering. And yes, on each visit to the gallery, I see something I have not seen before. We will have questions at the end of the presentation. Now I want to introduce Jennifer Brown, manager of the collection. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you all for being here tonight in celebration of the new Glass Flowers book. The Ware collection of Blaschka glass models of plants is better known as the Glass Flowers. This one-of-a-kind collection has delighted museum visitors, educated students, and inspired artistic and scholarly works for more than a century. The Glass Flowers are in permanent exhibition at the Harvard Museum of Natural History, and they are part of the Harvard University Herbaria's collections. Professor George Lincoln Goodale was a botanist and the founding director of Harvard's Botanical Museum. He commissioned the Glass Flowers as a teaching collection that would also be a museum exhibit. Goodale was inspired by the displays of mounted animals in Harvard's Museum of Comparative Zoology, but creating a similar exhibit about botany was difficult because of how plants look when they are preserved. Plants are pressed and dried, then mounted on paper herbarium sheets. Their colors fade and they are flattened. Plants also lose their color when they are preserved in liquid. Goodale wanted more exceptional scientific models than ones made from paper mache or from wax. He also felt that those materials would be susceptible to deterioration over time. Here you can see how effective the glass models are. And again, in this comparison between a real iris and the glass model on the right. While Goodale was planning exhibits for the new Botanical Museum, he saw models of marine invertebrates made from glass on display in the Museum of Comparative Zoology. These glass models were made by Leopold Blaschka and his son Rudolf. Like plants, these soft-bodied animals lose their lifelike appearance when they are preserved, but the Blaschka's highly realistic glass models allowed people to observe and study them as they would appear in nature. Here is another example showing how effective the Blaschka models are. Goodale thought the Blaschkas could use the same glass working techniques to produce equally realistic models of plants for the Botanical Museum. Leopold and Rudolf Blaschka came from a lineage of glassworkers believed to trace back to 15th century Venice, and their craft was passed down through multiple generations. Leopold learned glassworking from his father, and he also studied painting, jewelry making, and metalworking. Rudolf started working with his father in 1870 when he was 13 years old, and he officially joined the business in 1876. The family lived in Bohemia. The area is now part of the Czech Republic, and moved to Dresden, Germany in 1863. Leopold first had the idea to imitate marine invertebrates in glass when he saw jellyfish while traveling to the United States in 1853. He made his first marine invertebrate models 10 years later after moving to Dresden. Museums and private collectors started ordering models from Leopold, and over the next 2 decades, the Blaschkas expanded their offerings to include hundreds of plant species. Goodale visited the Blaschkas' workshop in 1886 to ask if they might make some plants for the Botanical Museum. They were reluctant at first, but eventually agreed to the commission. The first shipment was damaged during customs inspection in New York, but the broken models were promising and they were shown to potential supporters. Mary Lee Ware was one of Goodale's former students. She and her mother, Elizabeth C. Ware, provided funding to order more models. With support from the Wares, the Blaschkas divided their time between making invertebrate animal models for other institutions and plant models for Harvard. After 3 years, the Blaschkas wanted to focus on one type of work, and in April 1890, they signed a 10-year contract with Harvard to exclusively work on the glass flowers. They stopped making models for other institutions at that time. Leopold Blaschka died in 1895, and Rudolf worked on the collection until his death in 1939. So an agreement to make some models in 1886 turned into a 50-year-long project. The final shipment of models was delivered in 1936. When the commission began, Goodale hoped to get 50 models. There are 4,300 models in the collection, and they represent 780 plant species. The glass flowers were made by Leopold and Rudolf Blaschka alone, and their productivity was so great that about 70% of the collection was completed when Leopold died in 1895. So that's 9 years of the Blaschkas working on the collection together, and 3 of those years were only half-time. The Wares remained devoted benefactors for the entire commission, and the collection is a gift in memory of Elizabeth's husband and Mary's father, Dr. Charles Eliot Ware. The Blaschkas used lamp working to make the models. This is a glass working technique in which glass is melted in a flame and shaped. Lamp working is also called flame working or torch working. This photo shows Wesley Fleming using flame working to make a glass sculpture. And here you can see more of his work area, including some of the tools and materials that he uses. The Blaschkas worked from direct observation and often drew the organisms they studied. Besides being beautiful and astonishingly realistic, the models are scientifically accurate, even in the fine details that can only be seen with magnification. The glass flowers proved to be an effective teaching collection and a popular museum exhibit. The collection has been displayed in the same third-floor gallery since the Botanical Museum opened in 1890. Changes and improvements were made to the exhibit over time, especially as there was a better understanding of how temperature, humidity, and light affect objects and artifacts. This is the exhibit in 1931. Part of the collection was displayed on the landing outside of the main gallery. These models were removed in October 2000 and put in storage. Here are some photos of the exhibit through the years. While changes and improvements were made to the exhibit, the model arrangement didn't change. The last time the models were arranged was in 1925. This is the same part of the exhibit in the 1930s and in 2015. And the model locations have not changed. The first major renovation of the glass flowers exhibit was completed in May 2016. The logistics of moving and storing these fragile objects was one of the challenges that prevented a large-scale renovation from happening before then. There was a 1.5 years of planning before work started in the exhibit. During this time, a new storage facility and a conservation lab were set up, and Scott Fulton was hired as the first full-time conservator for the collection. The glass flowers staff worked closely with the Harvard Museums of Science and Culture Exhibitions Department on the renovation. We wanted to maintain the character of the exhibit while making necessary updates. The exhibit had to be completely emptied. All object handling was done by me and Scott, and here are some fun before and after photos. The floor plan was redesigned. The old layout divided the room into 3 sections, and the new floor plan is more open. Continuing to use the historic cases helped us achieve our goal of maintaining the exhibit's character. Most of the cases are over 100 years old and all of them needed to be restored. 8 new cases were designed for rotating exhibitions within the Glass Flowers Gallery. Having space to bring objects out of storage for special exhibitions lets us show more of the collection and gives visitors more reasons to return. The room was painted, the original wood floors were uncovered, a new HVAC system and new lighting were installed, and the exterior of the exhibit was updated. The models were rearranged according to the Angiosperm phylogeny group. This is a contemporary plant classification system. Interpretive text panels about botany were added, and all labels were redesigned and updated. The exhibit was closed for a little more than 6 months. Several exciting projects have happened following the exhibit renovation, including the new book, Glass Flowers, Marvels of Art and Science at Harvard. The last photography book on the collection was published in 1982. The exhibit renovation was important for the care and maintenance of the collection, and none of this recent work would have been possible without our conservation program. I'm going to turn the presentation over to our head conservator, Scott Fulton, so he can talk about his work with the collection. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. As conservator for the Ware collection, I am pleased to share with all of you some of the hidden details that impact the condition of the collection and the long-term care of the collection. Most of the details that I will present to you tonight, most people have not seen or are aware of. It's the last 5 years since I came to be the Ware collection conservator. We've learned a lot. One thing is that the single most important reminder for any person in close proximity to one of the glass flowers is that despite their allure, they are not flexible. The leaves, the blossoms, the branches, they don't bend and they don't sway when you blow on them. They appear that real. And they do not particularly describe glass at all until you look really closely. The enormity of the Harvard's Ware collection of Blaschka glass models of plants is difficult to comprehend, particularly because they were made by just 2 lamp workers. In scope, they represent the flora of the world, with many representatives of economically important crops like apple, pear, strawberry, coconut, cashew, coffee, and tea. The Blaschka's methods and the solutions to challenges that they face cannot be found in notebooks or ledger books. The best written sources of historical information that we have are the archived correspondence between Mary Ware, benefactor of the Blaschkas, and the museum directors of the Botanical Museum, George Goodale and Oakes Ames. One of her letters to Oakes Ames describes Rudolf Blaschka at his workbench during a visit to his Dresden studio on October 3rd, 1925. Mary Ware recounts seeing a work table strewn not only with his tools, but also with trays of glass leaves, quote, formed but not colored, end quote. One can imagine Mary Ware standing over Rudolph's shoulder as he worked, witnessing an array of glass stems with leaves at different stages of drying and cooling. She writes that there were, quote, bottles with powdered glass ready as needed, and saucers of enameled paints of powdered glass, end quote. Next slide. These letters and other correspondence from the Blaschkas provide a peek into their working lives. in their business relationship with Harvard University's Botanical Museum in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Our immediate source of information comes from close observation of the models themselves and from selective analysis of sherds and fragments that have fallen off the models over time. Earlier studies of the glass flowers were done at Harvard's Fogg Museum of Art in 1992. It was established then that the early Blaschka plant models, made within the first 10 years of their contact with Harvard, employed a commercial alkali soda glass of silica, sodium, and a small amount of potassium. It's likely that the Blaschka's routine was shaped by lampworker tradition that came down to them through family. Recent work has been done at Harvard's Strauss Conservation Center to analyze very small, loose leaf fragments and powdered residue from active glass corrosion in the models. This was to characterize original glass composition and to pinpoint possible causes of deterioration. The Blaschkas used their knowledge of jewelry making to start with a metal wire armature or skeleton, usually of copper, for each model. Using wire of differing gauge, they strung sections of glass tubing like beads. The smaller parts, the leaves, flowers, petals, and even the roots, were anchored by very fine copper wires to heavier gauge base wires. Animal glue was then used to secure these parts while being fused in place with powdered glass, or what we call frit, glass frit, by the flame of a paraffin lamp. The Blaschkas likely obtained their raw materials locally, near their studio and hometown of Hosterwitz near Dresden. They might have ordered glassware from factories in the glass-producing region of Bohemia, as did Leopold's father and grandfather. Recent analysis has revealed the use of organic binding media, such as plant gums, tree resins, and glue-based distemper, to reduce surface gloss of the clear glass. Their painting technique, as well as their choice of media, changed with each model to capture subtle variation of natural color, surface texture, and reflectance found in the plant itself. The Blaschkas were particularly adept at imparting a variety of natural matte appearances to mimic specific plant species. Matting agents such as magnesium silicate or talc and barium sulfate have been identified in cross-sections using microprobe analysis. The velvet-like surface of Verbascum thapsus was achieved with cotton fibers, probably blown as flocking onto the surface of leaf and stem that was made sticky with an application of animal glue. Raised surface details like venation on leaves, pubescence on stems, or bark on branches were replicated with various raw materials common in their studio. The photomicrograph at the bottom is from a sample that I pulled from Verbascum, the model, and we looked at it under the microscope in Dr. Pfister's lab. A stem with thorns like this model of Mechanella lineara was likely created by pricking the molten surface of the glass tube and pulling out the softened glass like toffee to a raised point. Chemical and microscopic analyses of coatings and paint media was useful in determining the composition of the coatings and the adhesives. Looking at earlier Blaschka models under ultraviolet light revealed to us by its distinctive fluorescence that a protein glue coating was present. We used an analytical method called MALDI, M-A-L-D-I, which pinpointed the species of animal from which the glue was derived, even. cow, sheep, goat, and horse have each been fingerprinted and found present in the Blaschka glue pot. The Blaschka's choice of colorants and raw materials evolved between 1886 and 1936. They used a mixture of media that were available and traditional to lampworking practice. Cross-section analysis of samples from early glass models show an animal glue layer on the bare glass serving as a ground to support the paint layer above. On some models, the reaction of these proteinaceous glues in unstable gallery and storage environments led to peeling and lifting of paint and applied details. It seems likely that Rudolf Blaschka was aware of this problem and would have been inclined to find another, much more stable approach to imparting color to his models. His experimentation with colored glasses ultimately transitioned into an enduring use of colored glass in lieu of paint. By 1906, Rudolf had already begun modifying the composition of his glass enamels with compounds of lead and potassium so that he could achieve glass batches with lower melting points. Reducing these homemade enamels to a fine glass powder and annealing these over a base glass structure of higher melting point made it possible for him to enliven and broaden his palette. These innovative methods work particularly well in mimicking the mottled appearance of natural foliage in his diseased fruit series. Unfortunately, Rudolph's experimentation also introduced unforeseen conservation problems created by introducing lead into the chemistry of the glass. The results are visible in the models today as white spotting on the surfaces of leaves and the fruit of his later models. The models affected with this white efflorescence can cause confusion. It's easy to misinterpret the white spots to be the artist's intentional rendering of a fungal disease. For many years, this chemical manifestation went largely unnoticed. Left untreated, the glass becomes crizzled and fractured from the expansion of lead salt crystals, leading to losses of surface detail. About 64 models, most of them made between 1900 and 1936, are affected by this condition. Decades of seasonal changes in New England and exposure to an unstable indoor climate have compromised the condition of each model in the Ware collection. Shrinkage and swelling of organic glues, coatings, and paint have caused delamination where the paint has lifted away from the glass. The tactile strength of a shrinking animal glue coating in dry conditions can cause thin glass itself to be pulled apart by the stress, as you can see in the upper left slide. It's worth noting that the Blaschkas were very adept at drawing out the glass to make wafer-thin parts. And in this photomicrograph, the image measures the fragment at 500 microns, or half of a millimeter in thickness. It's pretty amazing. On some models, sections of glass are cracked or missing entirely at the juncture of stems and branches. These models have succumbed to years of subtle flexing and vibration caused by nearby foot traffic. Thus exposed, the underlying copper wire can corrode and lead to further loss of glass. As the conservator, I routinely consolidate these damaged areas with a reversible adhesive. The lost section of glass is then filled by brush with a viscous, thick slurry of the same adhesive, pigmented to match the surrounding area. It sometimes happens that leaves and flower petals lose their grip and spontaneously drop off when old glue joins fail. Likewise, glass flower parts that were insufficiently annealed can fracture along invisible crack lines. Over the years, this has led to the permanent loss of details. small and large. A novel method for filling gaps and losses in glass objects, developed by glass conservator Stephen Koob at the Corning Museum of Glass, proved to be very useful in the treatment of pitcher plant, number 721, easily the largest model in the Ware collection. The procedure involved molding and casting a thin acrylic sheet and tracing a reversible cutout to replace the missing section of glass on this leaf. Japanese papers have also been used in this lab selectively to fill smaller voids or as a reinforcing repair material. When coal-burning furnaces were the norm, a very fine layering of black soot permeated the cases over many years and was deposited on each and every of the models. Embarking on the task of cleaning these glass models requires delicate maneuvering. The approach is often restricted to foliage and flowers that are most easily accessed. Reaching the leaves and blossoms on the interior of a model's foliage can be accomplished very carefully using soft cotton swabs and an artist's brush. Selective solvent cleaning can be effective in removing the black oily soot without disturbing the water and alcohol-sensitive paints and coatings under the grime. In 1895, when nearly 75% of the entire Ware collection had already been completed by the Blaschkas, director George Lincoln Goodale was inspired to write, and I quote, "In no case has there been observed the slightest change in color of the pigments or in the character of the surface by exposure to light. It may be assumed, therefore, that these models possess a high degree of permanence under ordinary museum conditions. They are a valuable record of form, color, and texture for future comparison," end quote. While the condition of the Ware collection today cannot be described in the same words that Goodale used in 1895, there is no doubt that over the years, the Harvard Museums of Natural History and the Harvard University Herbaria have played a vital and successful role in maintaining the health of this unique and uniquely fragile collection. Upholding the best principles of conservation and preservation will ensure that visitors to the glass flowers will continue to experience this amazing confusion of glass with real for many years to come. Thank you. I would like to introduce next our speaker, Natalja Kent, whose gift in photography for capturing beauty in nature and in glass is made obvious in our new book featuring the glass flowers. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, for that introduction. And I am so grateful to be here today with all of you. Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Jenny and Don. It's a true honor to be a part of this project. I am, let's see, I'm gonna get my slideshow ready here. Oops. Let's share the screen. So I'm a photographer based in Los Angeles, photographer and artist, and I'm also an avid gardener. And I am also Czech, which the Blaschkas are Czech. So I felt this very deeply woven draw to these objects in this book. And having the opportunity to come in and work with these feats of the human hand so closely was an absolute dream for me and absolutely a highlight of my career. And I'm going to show you a little bit today about my process behind the shooting of this book. So I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit, and you'll see here that the banana plant is laying on a sheet of plexiglass. Scott is on the left, Jenny in the center, and I'm on the right. And you know, what we're doing here is we're kind of building a world here, placing the object down, and then you can see over here, these are actually plastic plants, believe it or not. And the intention with that was, so my approach was, how does this plant exist in its native location? With the banana plant specifically, it's in a tropical environment. So I tried to build in some shading and some dappling and some light. And also each object got its own color background that might be appropriate for where it would grow in its native environment. Being an avid gardener, I actually know a lot of these plants quite intimately. And when I didn't, I did research and consulted Jenny and Scott, who were so helpful throughout this process. But it was really a process of discovery. Each glass plant would be laid on the plexi, and I would build in whatever it seemed to want. Here with the water lily, a lot of blocking and reflecting and different forms of treatment were needed for its environment. And here, this is the banana plant again, and you can see down here, there's some of that dappled light coming through these ferns and the propped plants that we used. So that's kind of the shooting method. And then you'll see here with the showy penstemon, this is native to where I live here in Southern California, and it grows in a meadow in the late spring around the ficus and the ivy. And you can see here, there's some dappled light coming in on the left of this image. And here we have the hard cast California afternoon sunlight that I tried to recreate, showing some of this iridescence in the petal, coming in very close and really showing the technique and the hand while building the world of this soft green environment that this might live. And here the rose, I imagined a beautiful Rhode Island hillside, blue sky in the morning, the rose budding up, and the yucca on a Malibu hill surrounded by sage and grass, muted tones in the summer. And the laurel growing on a Cape Cod hillside, again with the sun coming in, keeping that blue somewhat muted, somewhat soft. Right here on this image on the right, close up of the laurel, I was really thinking about how the light in New England has a pretty soft tone to it because of the moisture in the air. So thinking about that and building the light in with that in mind. The pepper, which has its beautiful reaching, undulating leaves and the hard California light, and the pepper again with its fruiting buds. Up close here, you'll see this sweep of color. The image on the right was just a beautiful vignette that both Jenny and I fell in love with. This little berry, it seemed to be composed on its own. You know, digging into these objects, I really got to see how the Blaschkas were seeing and making these for us to view, for us to explore. And each one it really was a universe that I got to dive into. I spent hours and hours with each model, photographing, looking, listening. On the left here, we have Father Gilla. This branch right here almost seemed to bend up and look towards my light as if a school portrait. It's such a tender moment, and it was such a wonderful commune with this incredible craft. And again here, the water lily, you see it coming up from a pond in Virginia where I imagined it growing. And this model was so wonderful to work with because here you have the kind of leathery, waterproof leaves that are so thick and vibrant. And you also can see here a little bit of the translucency. So I tried to show the veining and the sculptural forms of the botanical accuracy that they did, of course, highlighting the bloom as the feature of the object, but considering that all parts of this plant were very important. And so now that I've talked a little bit about the world building, I'm gonna dive into how I tried to show the hands of the maker with each of these photographic exploration. So right here with the salvia, the undulating pistils and stamen coming up. So this hypoxis, this was a really wonderful exploration for me. This is a smaller object in the collection. I think it's maybe 16 inches, I'm just guessing, but each one of those blooms is about the size of my thumbnail. So it's rather tiny, and the way that I lit this was kind of a midday cast light coming down, showing those leaves, etching the flower with a little bit of shadow, a little bit of light. And on the right, you can see that hard cast light really coming into the bloom. And as we go closer, so I was able to use macro lenses and extensions and get very, very deep and very close. And I honestly had to hold my breath for a lot of these shots because I was very close, and Scott's right, they do not bend. And I was very self-aware about the delicacy around me. And in this view, we saw for the first time that the Blaschkas had actually put pollen deposits within the buds. And this was just a moving moment of seeing their dedication and their accuracy and their deep dive into the botany of these beautiful models. Here, the Aristolochia, we came in so close so as to see these etchings within each bloom. And this incredible detail that they left for us to discover. And the pinecone bromelade. Now this was a fascinating discovery. It's a larger model, but the bloom it's small. I'd say maybe 1.5 inches, just kind of guessing upon memory. But once we came in, I came in very, very close, and this little bud on the upper left protruded out and was shown to us, and it hadn't been noticed before that there was a bud within the bud of this object. And that was a true gift of this discovery, to see the hands of the maker going in so close and so accurate. And of course, this is a highlight, the aster with its incredible fading color of purples to orange to yellow. And I love this detail. It feels so flawed in its reality and its truth to nature. The pollen deposits and the stamen and the pistils and the petals. This one just really struck me. And of course, Castellopinia, this object I felt was like witnessing a ballroom dance. The flowing undulation of these forms were just beyond me. I tried to light them, both casting light and allowing for shadow to really show this form and its movement and its glory. And I felt even in the leaves that you could see the kind of flowing soft wind, the light and the shadow that they create, showing their form. And of course, the iris with its hand-painted bee indicator lines. These paintings just show how dedicated the Blaschkas were to this project. And of course, this is the cross-section of the St. John's wort. What I loved about this was that the Blaschkas went in so deep. They not only knew these plants on a microscopic level, they knew them on their life scale level as well. So their intimacy was just astounding to me as a photographer coming in. Here we have Sisyrinchium, and again, these blooms are very small, a little larger than my thumbnail, but the delicacy of each one of these petals, drawing around, puckering in, pointing out, puckering around, and then these lines of just slightly deeper purple on an almost iridescent surface. It was truly a moment of discovery. Here, the Hart's Tongue fern, one of my absolute favorites. The undulation on these leaves and the curling stems and new buds, they were just moving. Those almost lightning strikes of roots were in their own way a place of discovery and form. And the way that I was able to light these to kind of show the new bud and the older leaf in unity, and coming closer and closer, again, holding my breath for a lot of these shots because I was very close. And it was such an honor because I really got to sit and meditate and be with these marvels, true marvels of the human hand. And these roots, lighting them to show their movement and their form, all the way in here to the spores inlaid within each of those mature leaves. This, to me, just shows the depth that the Blaschkas brought to this project. And now I'm going to talk about a little bit of a challenge that happened during the photography. So this maple, you all will likely recognize this. This was a really challenging work to photograph. So you can see on the image on the right, it's rather translucent. You have some light passing through, and it was a very translucent object. The glass itself, it was very light in translucency. However, it was also really strongly pigmented. So you see here and down here this very rich, vibrant red, while at the same time it was somewhat glossy and shiny. And so I had to do this balancing act of what can I find between the gloss, between the transparency, and showing this strong color without completely wiping out the texture, the surface texture. So that was a challenge. And here, these paper thin, waxy petals of the cactus, again, held just the same problem. And also, I love problems in photography, and it was a real thrill to photograph this in a very realistic way. And also making sure not only to capture those petals, but also each one of the needles coming out, letting them etch in the light and be seen and be loved and appreciated. And grevillea, another complicated piece. So this was another challenge of the project, which was some of these objects were so complicated, and the eye wanted to move around to so many parts of it. It was hard to know if there was a focal place. So really slowing down, considering what we were to look at with this and coming in closer and deeper, I was able to find portraits of these incredible art sculptures. So lastly, we have the slender rosette grass, and this is a true wonder. I mean, this was absolutely mind-boggling. On the left here, we have the full life-size grass, which you may be familiar with. It's very common. I think this model is probably 17 inches or so. I'm sorry, Jenny, I'm not giving the exact sizes, but it's life-size. You see the roots tendriling down on the right, like hair. And I just want to point this out. Right here, this is the flower up here that we're looking at now. On this left side, that same flower. And on the right here, moving right over here. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of scale and how deeply the Blaschkas went in. And that same flower is what is on the cover of the book here, and an even closer dive into that. So with that, I am going to end my slideshow, and we will now hand it over to Dawn, who will take questions. Thank you so much for your time, everybody, and it's an honor to be here.
Actually, I think we're all joining in now.
Oh, good.
And we'll do some questions here. There are a few things that came through. I'm new to all of this, so I've answered some of you publicly. I hope I haven't embarrassed you or myself. There are a couple questions here. I think it's Cynthia and Susan who are asking about where the Blaschkas got their plants that they used to model. And I think I'll ask Jenny to say a little bit about that.
Sure thing. As I said in my presentation, and Dawn mentioned as well, and I think Scott did too, the Blaschkas really worked from direct observation. Harvard provided them with plant materials, seeds, and plant cuttings to plant on their property. They were avid gardeners. They also studied pressed herbarium specimens That grass that Natalja photographed was based on a plant specimen from New Hampshire, I believe, that a botanist named Walter Dean sent to Rudolf Blaschka to use as reference. Rudolf also visited North America twice, in 1892 and in 1895. And during his travels, he observed plants in the field, he drew them, he collected specimens. So the Blaschkas were really, working with the actual plant material, living plants and pressed specimens.
And we have some of those specimens in the collection.
We do, and the Corning Museum of Glass has the drawings.
Yes. There's another question about the toxic materials from Stephanie, the toxic materials that may have been used by the Blaschkas, and that's kind of for Scott. What were they using that may have been toxic, and did they know that?
I've often wondered how much they knew. I'm sure they were aware of the fact they were using a lot of lead. That is of concern today. Whether it was to them then, I do not know. But they had a full array of a full lab of laboratory reagents, and I kind of doubt that they used the best practices in terms of handling those materials. But they lived to a ripe old age, each of them, and somehow they seem to get by. I don't know if that's a good answer to your question.
No, well, that's fine, I think. Let's see. We have a number of other things. What kind of torches, what kind of flame were they using? That's a question. I don't know if that's maybe Jenny, you want to start, and then Scott can take it up.
Sure. The Blaschkas were using like an oil or a paraffin lamp. I would, for more details, I would defer to the Corning Museum of Glass, as they know more about the equipment and the science of all of that. There is also a great video on Corning's website that shows a lamp working table from the same period that the Blaschkas worked. But yeah, the Blaschkas were using oil or paraffin. Scott, do you have any insight?
I might add that if you noticed with the Blaschka work table, there was, it's hard to pick it out, but there was a lamp that they would have used, and that would have been connected to tubing that would have gone around and hooked up to the bellows, a foot-operated bellows under the table. And without the bellows, the flame that they would have gotten from the paraffin or the oil would have been pretty low and not as hot. But with the action of the bellows, it came through a manifold and it was increased. It increased the heat of the flame to a point where they could actually soften the glass and manipulate it to the degree that they did. I think later on, I think that, yeah, there it is. So we're talking about this lamp and these bellows, a foot-operated bellows. But what you can't see would have been probably a crude rubber tubing that came around and into the lamp itself and up through this collimator right here where the flame would be, and that would increase the heat to a degree that they could actually work the glass.
Good. Dan asks all these hours and so forth about how much they were paid, and I think we'd have to do some calculations there to get it to today's dollars. But I would say that Mary Lee Ware was very conscientious about supporting Leopold and Rudolf, and Rudolf was particularly supported by her, and in fact ended up with a kind of pension that got continued. So we'd have to do the calculations, but they were paid for a good sum for doing their work. Beverly asks, how long did some of the creations take to make? And we've thought about that. Jenny, do you want to say anything about that?
So as Scott said in his presentation, there's little documentation about the Blaschka's techniques and their methods. It's known that the Blaschkas, they were usually working on many objects at once. So it wasn't, they would start a piece and then finish it. They were usually working on a bunch of models, making the pieces, putting them together, doing the finishing work in stages. Their most productive year was, I think it was 1891, and they made, this is in the book, I have the exact number in my essay in the book, but I think they made around 700 objects that year. So just to give a sense of their productivity and how long it would have taken to make these objects. Rudolph's production slowed down when he was working alone, and part of his, experimentation also contributed to, he was experimenting more, and that took time to, fine tune these new techniques.
Great. I will just say there are several questions about the particular models that were made and how that decision was made, and then how the models were and are used in teaching. And we know that to some extent the directors of the Botanical Museum asked for particular models and tried to present those models in the collection. This was particularly true a little bit later on with Oakes Ames, who was very much concentrating on plants that were important economically. So some of those were specifically requested. Well, these days, the collection is used by students. When I teach botany courses, I have a little exercise that we use for the glass flowers. I would say that beyond glass flowers, other students or beyond botany, other people are using the glass flowers and are inspired by them. So we have history of science, students doing projects. There are others. Jenny, you may want to fill in here a little bit.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about working with this collection is, the people that I come in contact with, students, as Dawn said, students who are studying botany use the collection, history of science, people who are interested in conservation, artists are inspired by the collection. It's really interesting to see how people approach this collection and what they think about it. So I would say that while the glass flowers might not be used as much for their original purpose, of identifying plants, they continue to be very useful educational tools. And, a lot of people are researching them from different angles.
Vicki and Kathy have both asked about whether they had interns or understudies. And this is one of the things that is really pretty amazing. No, they didn't. And so when Scott mentioned this letter from Mary Lee Ware, and that being our evidence of how things were done, it's very true. There were very few observations of what they were doing, and the only written observation we know is that letter. And nobody was waiting around and watching and learning these techniques. And so if we look today, I think it's fair to say that people are making flowers of glass, but none of them quite meet the level of production of accuracy that the Blaschka models meet. So, even though Rudolf said there wasn't a secret, I think the idea is the secret was kind of in their hands and in their manipulation of these materials. Someone asked you, Nadia, which model you felt most nerve-wracking to photograph?
That's a great question. Which one was the most nerve-wracking? Honestly, the iris was very difficult because it was so big. And Jenny and Scott can recall our space was very small in those first images. We actually photographed within the archive itself, and the space was just so limited, and I had to shoot each one from overhead, both with a very plain shot and then a kind of world-built shot, as I described. And the iris was just so large that it barely fit within view. And that was a nerve-wracking moment because I was so high above it. And it was a complicated one, but we got beautiful images, and it was a wonderful piece to collect photographs of.
Yeah. David is asked about how the Blaschkas documented their work. They did not photograph. They did drawings, and those drawings are really quite beautiful. And if you remember being in the gallery, or when you are in the gallery the next time, realize that the back wall are blow-ups of some of those drawings. Those were done in the field, and they were done in order to be able to come back into the studio and make the plants. So they're very, very accurate. Sarah asks, is there a clear connection to the glass artisans of Venice? And we know that there is kind of an ancestral connection, but I don't know that there's a direct connection. Jenny, do you want to say anything there?
I personally haven't embarked on a very in-depth Blaschka genealogy adventure. There's a letter that Rudolf Blaschka wrote for Goodale that details the family history, and he mentions, this Venetian origin of the family. There's also a document from a Czech genealogy website that I've been sort of spending some time with lately. So I think for me, it's a little bit of just, kind of family history handed down from, generation to generation. But I haven't found any documents or anything like that really solidifying the Venetian origin.
Okay. Stephen asks you, Scott, how much conservation work is still needed?
Oh, there is plenty of work to be done. With as many as 4,300 individual models, there's lots of work to be done. I personally, one of my favorites in the collections are the ferns. I correct me if I'm wrong, Don, but the microscopic life cycles.
Oh yeah.
And how you would describe them, I'm not sure, but I really like them, and they're in really very poor shape. They need attention, but that's for another time. For what we've done in the last few years is quite incredible, I think. And there's still more work to be done with the salts damage, and certainly delamination is an issue. And I'm working on solutions to that problem.
Marina asks about, can you share, any of us, I guess, more about your personal revelations related to the astounding verisimilitude of these works? Natalja has helped us with that a little bit. Scott, you're always discovering things. What's...
Well, you saw that I showed a picture, a close-up of Verbascum thapsus. I call it mullendock. I think there's another more common name for it. Mulline, I'm not sure. But I was walking with my wife a couple months ago, and I looked into somebody's backyard, and there was mullendock. It stands about 3 feet tall. It's fuzzy-leaved and a tall corncob-like blossom, yellow blossoms. And I was really struck by how close the Blaschka model is to the real thing. And that's always fun. And also to see, other plants that you just take for granted growing out of the side of the road as you're walking along. It's amazing that the Blaschka's covered so much ground and so many seemingly ordinary plants.
I want to add to that a little. Actually, the first time I came with Jenny down to see the collection, I saw the mullein on a platform behind me, and I almost reached back and touched it because it's the kind of plant that I love, and it grows in New England on the roadside, and you always just want to touch it because it's kind of a lamb's ear texture, right? And I just almost did my natural touch. I mean, it was astoundingly lifelike, and every model, every dive deep into, I know Scott can see those breaks and can see those wires. I was in complete suspension of belief that I was actually photographing plants. And there were a few times that I almost blew a leaf aside to try to get the flower. And thank goodness I didn't. But every day, every deep dive was an absolute wonder. And it's really visible in the book. I think you can really see all of that accuracy that the Blaschkas did.
I would just say that there are a number of gardeners I see who have had comments in the question area, and I too am a gardener. But I like to ask people to go to one of their favorite plants and to really look at the Blaschka models. So this is something that you've seen and you've worked with and you've experienced. And, you try to look and see, are all the pieces there? Is everything the way it should be? One of the models that I love, and we've used it in the book, is Utricularia. Utricularia is this bladderwort, and it's an aquatic plant. And if you look at that in the book, there are hundreds, thousands maybe, of these little bladders that are on the plant. And those bladders capture animals in the water, but it's just amazing to stop and look at it. And so I think, as I said in the introduction, every time I go into the gallery, if I take the time, I find something that I've never seen before, and I think that's just amazing. We have time for a couple more questions. One is, can you talk about the mounts for the models? And that's Scott.
Yes, I'd be happy to talk about that. I didn't really have time to cover the mounts and the mounting process for the models, but it's an effort in itself, and it's quite involved. The mounts that the Blaschka models have been resting on for many, many years, since the turn of the century, the early 1900s, has been a cast plaster palette, basically. And the models were wired down with using plaster posts at strategic points around the model, along the branch, under leaves, etc. That's been working fine to a certain extent, except that the worry is that there could be an invisible crack line or fault line that's running through the plaster base that, if it decided to break at the wrong time, it could cut right underneath a model and compromise it. So what we've been doing is remounting the models onto lightweight foam core, acid-free foam core, and then using archival foam, plastizote foam cushions at strategic places underneath, and then just floating the model up and using a non-corrosive wire, nickel chromium, to basically cinch the model down gently, and the wire passes through surgical tubing so it doesn't scratch the painted surface. But it's basically a process of floating the model on cushions and supporting the model at its weakest points. That's what we do.
May asked if we were able to photograph all the plants And all I can say is, oh, I wish we could, but we haven't. We haven't been able to do that. So this is a selection. And I should say that in the gallery, in the new renovated gallery, you're also seeing a selection of the models. Not all the models are on exhibit. So it's important to realize that in storage, there are a number of models that we could put out. We tried to have examples from every plant family where we had the possibility of doing that. But we haven't put out some of the special models, the series of models that we have. We've done temporary exhibits. Luckily, we have the ability to do that now. We've done temporary exhibits on the rotten fruit and the pollination models, which are wonderful. Scott mentioned the life cycle models. These are models of algae and fungi and plants that show kind of from spore through development of some of the organisms and shows the microscopic structure. They're beautiful. We've had some of the moss models out before the gallery renovation. So there are many, many parts of the collection and things that we have and we hope to have on exhibit. I should say we're out of time or almost out of time, that were it not for COVID virus, we would have done this in May and had the book launching in May, and we would have had an exhibit in the gallery that is called In the Hands of the Makers, and it explores how the Blaschkas made the models and what the materials were that they used and what some of the conservation issues are related to the models. We hope that that exhibit will come along perhaps in the spring when the museum may be back open. But we want to make sure that you know you can purchase the book. It is beautiful, and I hope you will do that. We appreciate all of the questions and comments that have come along in the question period here. And thank you for being here. It's been wonderful to be able to share all these wonderful photographs and all the hard work. So thank you. We'll sign off now. Good night.